What is up, everybody? Welcome in to another NBA draft lottery reaction. I know it's not live this time. Ethan y'all gotta I'm just gonna clap it up for you, Ethan, because as a Texas driver, I know the trenches that you just went through
Mm.
enduring the Texas interstate system for about 3 hours in a row. But you are here for us, and I'm happy that on the tail end of your drive, you got to hear the NBA draft lottery and the
Mm.
results, which were pretty solid for the Spurs.
It was 5 hours, but that's okay. The sentiment was still excellent, so I appreciate that. And yes, I did get to listen on that final 30-minute stretch, and it was a pleasurable listen to say the very least, Jude.
Yeah, and so for those of you guys who do not know, who are Spurs fans, the Spurs ended up with the fourth pick and here's the bigger thing, the eighth pick from the Toronto Raptors. And since we've
Mm.
really started focusing in on this lottery since the tail end of the season, we've kind of started getting into these draft prospects, Ethan. I
Mhm.
mean, there were even times where we did some tankathon sims and we were like, okay, I know this isn't the most exciting thing, but if we can get 6 and 7, we're gonna be very happy with that. We really, the thing for me and you was just like, can we get both of these picks? One to get the most out of the DeMar DeRozan trade. That's kind of funny to think about now,
Right.
sitting here in 2024. But also just the fact that it gives the Spurs so much more flexibility in a multitude of ways. Ethan, we're not going to go jump into trades as of right now. We'll probably mainly focus on like the potential prospects that we could pick in this area. But
Mhm.
man, when I saw that, I knew that the Spurs had a chance. Not to just start going into this, Ethan, but here's my reaction, or how I was feeling like while it was happening. I knew that once the ninth pick started, like, okay, that's where like the worst case scenario can happen. And the key
Right.
thing that I was looking for in the basically the seventh through the ninth pick was, okay, if the Spurs pop up, does it say, underneath the Spurs from Toronto Raptors? And
Mhm.
when number 8 was us and I saw from Toronto, I was like, oh my God, we did it.
I know.
And I know that that's not like, we could have got the seventh pick right after that and got 7 and 8. And, we wouldn't be feeling the same way that we are right now. It's, we ended up getting the fourth pick as we saw, but still when that happened, I was like, okay, we're for sure getting 2 top 10 picks.
Hmm.
And that made me feel real happy. That was where I was at, Ethan. I know we kind of just jumped into things there, but give me your thought process on the road when you heard that first pick drop.
Yeah, my heart was beating really fast, and it wasn't because of the rain and the wet roads. It was because, as you said, we approached that 10-9, and I was like, okay, are we going to slide? And like you said, is it going to be the Toronto pick or is it us falling to 7 or 8 range? But luckily, it was the pick from Toronto. It was actually not from the DeMar DeRozan trade, though. I believe this was from the Jakob Pertl trade.
Thank you for
Um,
correcting me.
so we appreciate that. I think Jakob was the ninth overall pick when he was drafted. So we basically traded the ninth overall pick for the future eighth overall pick. Hopefully, we're able to draft somebody that had a higher ceiling than Jakob Pertl. No disrespect to him, but that's like the ideal, right? And then to also jump forward, have Detroit fall to 5, and then we slide in and into that top 4 range with the fourth overall pick. Um, it doesn't compare quite to last year's, obviously, the excitement of getting number 1, Victor Wembanyama. But I think where we are today, what we know about the Spurs team, we have our franchise player. I think ultimately it's about building around him, and to get 2 picks this offseason, to kind of build, to continue to build around Victor Wembanyama, Jeremy Sohan, Devin Vassell. This was the perfect scenario for the San Antonio Spurs. And we didn't even talk about the potential to have 3 or 4 next season as well, and an even more loaded NBA 2025 draft class.
Yeah, as Velo3158 says, 2 top 8 picks, Ethan. They aren't
Mm.
just 2 picks for Victor Wembanyama. They're, probably the thing that I would come to mind is I was going to say 2 top 10 picks, but we don't want to sell ourselves short. Like our man Velo just said, 2 top 8
8 picks.
picks
Mm.
for Victor Wembanyama, Ethan. And, where I was getting mixed up there with the draft picks, Ethan, I'm a year ahead of myself. It's funny you alluded to that because the pick that I was thinking about DeMar, was the one that we have next year potentially, and I
Mm.
believe it's top 10 protected. I'd have to go double check that, but we have a Bulls pick next season is what I'm
Mm.
getting at.
Right on. Yes, sir.
But going back to number 4, so after number 8 got hit. And I know you touched on this a little bit, Ethan, but I just wanted to kind of go through the whole
Mhm.
emotions here. So after that happened, I believe at number 5, when Detroit fell, when
Mhm.
when they were at number 5, that's what guaranteed the Spurs going into the top 4. And
Yes.
when I heard that, obviously the excitement jumped up again. I'm like, okay, I was just happy that we jumped into the top 4, because here's what I sent to a friend, Ethan,
Mhm.
right before at 2:18, right before the draft lottery, the second half of that draft lottery started, or when they started naming names. I said, I'm hoping and praying for both picks. And if we can get one in the top 4, we're going to get somebody I like,
Mhm.
guaranteed. So when I heard that, I mean, I literally texted this right before that they started naming names here. So I mean, I was very satisfied. And the main reason that I was very satisfied with number 4 is, as of right now, and this is just my personal Spurs specific big board. You know what I mean? Here you go.
Mhm.
My top 4 guys are Alex Sarr. This isn't necessarily in order, but this is just who they are. Alex Sarr, Zachary Rasache, Rob Dillingham, and Nikola Topic. And basically, what getting top 4 guarantees is, we're going to get one of those guys. I know there's some potential other names that maybe we could pick there, like a Reed Shepard, for example. If the
Mhm.
Spurs are end up really high on him, they could end up picking that there. But actually, in the mock draft that they showed today from Jonathan Givenoy that he made after the lottery, they had Reed Shepard going number 3 to the Houston Rockets, and they had
Mhm.
Rob Dillingham going number 4 to the San Antonio Spurs. And you guys can go check out our Spurs prospect breakdown on Rob Dillingham. He might be my favorite prospect in the draft. So I love to see that. But regardless, with my top 4 that I just mentioned, but I'm not going to be mad at Reed Shepard if the Spurs pick Reed Shepard at 4. They obviously believe in him enough to pick him there. So that would give me the confidence, if that pick was made. But once
Mhm.
again, going back to my top 4, I'm just very happy we're going to get one of those guys, Ethan, because regardless of who that ends up being, or even if it's Reed Shepard, like, it's going to fill a need that we need on this team. You know what I'm saying? Like, if it's Sarr, it's going to
Mhm.
be that defensive anchor next to Wemby to really, take the load off him. And also, you can play Sarr when Wemby's out. You can stagger their minutes, even if, Sarr is going to be a starter, like we've talked about, and you can have the defensive potential and, the potential of just, the offensive versatility of those guys too, as Sarr develops with Rasache, automatic plug and play guy at the 3, really fills that need of what a starter should be at the 3 position, building this team moving forward. And
Mhm.
not to take everything away from you, Ethan, because I'm sure you feel a lot of this same stuff. But
Mhm.
then, with Rob or Topic, that solves the point guard issue. So that's kind of my thoughts on top 4. What were your emotions when you heard top 4? And then
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on who we could potentially pick there?
I mean, I think you just about covered it. The craziest thing for me about the top 4 picks, and this is something that they talked about on ESPN quite often, even before today, is no one really knows how it's going to shake out. Like the top 5 picks, especially, like no one, there's not like a surefire consensus that Sarr is even the number 1 pick. I think that that's going to be what it is, but no one's completely sold. Like last year, it was Victor Wembanyama, Brandon Miller, and Scoot Henderson. Like those are the top 3 guys, and usually that's how drafts are. This year, we really have no idea. And something that I was surprised about was Kevin O'Connor and others are slotting Donovan Clingan as like a top 3 guy.
Yeah.
And we were kind of scouting him around, 7, 8, 9, like with our Toronto pick, if that were to happen. So there's potential for him to be top 3. There's also potential for him to slide closer to the 10 range. I think the most important thing about today, I keep wanting to say tonight, about today, is that we have the ability to address 2 needs, not just one. So depending on who's available at 4, for me, I would rather have Rob Dillingham than say a Topic or a Reed Shepard if we're going to go in the guard direction. However, if Versace falls to 4, it's really difficult for me not to pick him because of his incredible versatility and upside, and the ability to slot him in immediately as that starting 3, which is probably our weakest position. I know a lot of people want to say it's Trey Jones, but I think that Trey Jones is a better, more capable starter at this point in his career than Julian Champagnie is at that 3 spot. So I think that that could be an immediate impact if we were to draft for Sachet. So there's no telling which direction we'll go, but the benefit of having that 8th pick is if we do decide to get a wing at that fourth spot. Maybe we get a point guard or a guard like Stephon Castle at 8. Like we still have the ability to address
Yes.
both needs depending on who's available at that time.
Yeah, what you just said at the end there really hits the nail on the head for me, Ethan. And also, we got 116 people in here right now,
Mm.
so we really appreciate that, guys. This is one of the biggest lives we've had in a while. But yeah, having those two picks allows us to address two needs. It gives us the flexibility at the fourth pick if somebody does fall. The more I think about it and the more I've been seeing stuff, I know in a lot of the Ringers big board, for example, has Rasache kind of in the low top tens. But the more that I've been looking at Ethan, I just basically all the other ones that I've seen have him in the top three. So it's hard for me to see him falling there.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is, I mean, it really just depends on what Atlanta does at number one. And that's the other thing that I also wanted to hit on. Atlanta getting number one kind of throws a wrench in this thing
Mm.
in a lot of different ways, Ethan. Whether they move that pick, and I'm not saying that that's potentially us. There's going to be even more trade rumors and Trae Young rumors specifically. And we've even been seeing the DeJounte stuff recently. He's been posting about Pop,
Mm-hmm.
talking about a lot of stuff. And that could just be him showing respect to Pop for all the stuff that he's done for him in the past. As that really is the sentiment from the post that he made. But there have been, talks about that. Shams Charania, we talked about it a couple episodes ago, said like the Spurs did inquire on DeJounte Murray. I'm not saying the Spurs are going to go do that, Ethan. I'm just saying that with Atlanta now having the number one pick, and even Woj said it today on the draft lottery, like they're looking to kind of retool their roster. And this was like the perfect scenario for them to kind of reset and, move forward in a different direction, under Quinn Snyder. Now, maybe that is just that they trade the number one pick and add another star, next to those two guys. But maybe it is that one of those guys get moved. And I'm not that's why I wanted to say, I'm not talking specifically about the Spurs here, because I think this opens up Atlanta's options. But what I'm trying to get to with talking about Atlanta is depending on what happens at one, whether there's a trade or whoever Atlanta picks, that's going to impact the next three picks, obviously. So
Mm-hmm.
if they were to just go with Sar, I don't know, maybe because the Wizards already have Bilal Coulibaly, they don't want to go with a Zachary Rasache. But also, that could be a reason to draft Zachary Rasache because they feel like they can play together and they've seen the potential from Bilal, who played in the same league. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But at number three, I would say that I don't feel like, I mean, maybe they could completely surprise me, Ethan, but just with having Dylan Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., I don't know if they would. I don't feel like Houston, out of the top three, they're the least likely to draft Rasache. So I feel like if he does get past the top two, maybe there is a chance he falls to the Spurs at 4.
Yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised, or not pleasantly surprised. I am happy that Houston got the third pick. And that's not something that you'll typically hear from a Spurs fan, but I think that that's the team that's least likely to pick one of the guys that we want. I don't think they want a Rob Dillingham, and I don't think they really need a Rasache like you're saying. I think they'll probably take a Reed Shepherd or even a Klingon if he were to fall to that spot and just shore up their backup center spot and basically remove Jacques Landale from their rotation, essentially by doing that. And Reed Shepherd would basically just become their future Fred VanVleet whenever he decides to age out of that Houston Rockets roster. I think he has potential there and to replace him and be a higher upside defender at the same time. I like the Rasache to the Wizards thing, though. Unfortunately, I think he and Bilal would play well off of each other because they're both defensive-minded guys with a lot of high upside and versatility. And say what you will about Kyle Kuzma, he probably learned a lot from Kyle Kuzma to play under him for at least a year or two as well. I think with Atlanta, that's crazy that they were able to jump from 10 to 1 first and foremost. Throws a little bit of a wrench into our situation because we don't technically know what that means. It could go so many different directions. The immediate vibe I got from Landry Fields was that they kind of want to integrate him into their current roster, but I don't think that they could do that. I think they need to pick two scenarios. One, Trae, DeJounte, or Trae, pick one,
Right.
and retool, like you said, around the duo of either Trae Young and Sar or DeJounte and Sar, whichever one they decide to do.
Right.
Um, or trade both of them and start from scratch and try maybe getting their pick from us back for
Right.
next year, and then basically just building around Sar and whoever they get next year, probably a top 3 pick, right? That to me is are their 2 avenues. So we'll have to just wait and see. I think it'll depend on how good Sar is off the bat and how confident Atlanta is that if they are to retool, that they're able to compete. Because right now they're not. You know what I mean? But if
Yeah.
Sar comes in and he's that guy, which I mean, he has the potential to be. He's not quite at that Wemby stage, right? But he is a 7-footer with a lot of upside and a lot of versatility. So if he comes in as just like out of this world from the get go, double digit scorer, all defensive level,
Everything
center,
translates. Right.
yeah, then the sky is the limit for Atlanta, just in terms of how they're able to surround he and whoever they decide to choose for his duo.
Yeah, and the whole conversation you just hit on, Ethan, is completely different if it's Detroit or Charlotte at number one, who had were two teams who fell. And Victor in the comments corrected me earlier; it was actually at number 6 when Charlotte fell there that moved the
Mm.
Spurs into the top 4. And not to just jump all over the place here, Ethan, but I mean when Atlanta jumped into the top 4 early, and then I think it was Houston who also jumped into the top 4, like within like the first
Yes.
4 picks or whatever that they announced. I was like, oh my gosh, like that didn't, at that point I wasn't feeling that great, but
Mhm.
somehow the Spurs still found a way for it to work out for them, even despite those two things happening. Because in that scenario with those two things happening, Detroit and Charlotte had a worse record than us this year.
Mhm.
Somehow, but that's the draft lottery game you play, and we're just lucky that it worked out for us twice. And this is the last thing I'll say on the draft lottery. I sent you this text, Ethan, but just for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, Tom Orsborn at the San Antonio News Express tweeted, the Spurs were 1 digit away from landing the number 1 overall pick for the second year in a row. It
Mm.
began with 6-10-14. The Spurs needed 3, but it came up 13, giving it to the Hawks. So on top of that, the Hawks literally got the number 1 pick off the hair of their chinny chin chin, Ethan. From
Mm.
this, and I mean, if that happened and we got 1 and 7, this would have just been crazy. I mean, it's already
Yeah.
crazy. Once again, thank you to the 150 of you that are in here right now. This isn't going to be the longest stream because, as we mentioned earlier, Ethan just traversed the Texas highway system, and also we want him to have a little bit of chill time before the work week starts this week.
Mhm.
So we're going to wrap this up in just about 13 minutes here. Going to do this at around 30 minutes. But Ethan, let's just jump straight into now where the Spurs can go. I know we talked about the potential prospects at both picks. Let's just say for our dream scenario, now that the lottery is in place, I know we talked about our dream scenario in the past. What are the 2 names that
Mm.
kind of stand out to you at both picks? And then after that, maybe we'll get into potential trade talk as well.
If things work out the way I think that they will with who the top 3 picks are, I'm gonna go with Rob Dillingham at 4, and at 8, Dalton Connect out of Tennessee. At that small forward spot, maybe to either be as starter and just be like a capable, immediately have an impact small forward, or off the bench to just get buckets. Because we had a breakdown of him as well. I think there's also a clip out there if you haven't seen it. We're both very high on his capabilities, coming in at 23, 24 years old.
23, yeah.
Um, and being able to have an immediate impact, and having both the 4 and the 8th pick gives us that breathing room to be able to draft an older player that can have that immediate impact and is not necessarily a 19-year-old that we strictly draft off potential.
Yeah, I mean that probably is the dream scenario for me too, Ethan. I guess the one thing that I'll just throw in here just to say something different is if Rasashe does somehow fall to 4 and we
Hmm.
roll with him at 4, that would probably mean that we would be looking for a guard at
Right.
number 8. Um, and that really, the next couple picks, potentially a lot of those guards could be picked. So it's hard to necessarily, just go with one. Like, I think, honestly, I'd be surprised if Reed Shepherd lasts until 8.
No, yeah, he's
Um,
gone.
maybe Topic falls down there. But honestly, at that point, it's probably feeling like Stephon Castle. That's kind of the name that stands out to me. And I know a lot of people are going to go to the shooting and say that he's a 2 guard and whatnot. But I mean, at that point, you're probably just drafting off potential. I mean, maybe the Spurs would trade back in that scenario and go with like, and I'm just bringing this name up, like an Isaiah Collier or somebody, just another point guard that's a little bit further down. Jared McCain. I haven't really dove into him too much, but he's from Duke. He seems like a 42% 3-point shooter. I believe he
Yep.
only had like 3 assists or something like that. But honestly, it kind of seems like he's more of a sure thing after a full season than like a Collier, as much
Mhm.
as a lot of people were big on him at the start of the year. So maybe that's another name at 8 that the Spurs could potentially go with. But I the more that I think about it, it's just like, one, I don't really think Rasashe is going to fall that far, which means it really is feeling more like Rob is going to be that pick, unless Houston goes with them at 3. But they've got a lot of other ball dominant guys already.
Mhm.
I feel like if they're going to pick a guard, like they would, which is why Jonathan Givenoy on the mock draft today, the instant reaction one, he gave him Reed Shepard. Like, because when you think about Jalen Green, who else am I forgetting on this Rockets team? I mean, I know you've got.
Amen Thompson was their last year's pick.
Thank you. That's the other one. Another Fred Van Vliet too. Like, I
Mhm.
know they might be drafting to kind of replace him, but I feel like if you're looking at Shepard and Dillingham Rockets wise, it's like obvious like Reed Shepard would be the better fit for the
Mhm.
Rockets.
He's a more capable off-ball player as well. Like Rob's really a ball dominant guy. Like to be at his best, electrifying play that he's so great at. He's in the pick and roll as the primary ball handler, whereas Reed Shepard, you could move him off screens and let him just snipe for days, and he could be a really effective piece for them.
Yeah, no, for sure. You mentioned the shooting as well. He's someone who's really connective, plays hard on defense, and is a good
Mhm.
passer too. For a lot of the guys in their offensive starting lineup that like having the ball in their hands. Um, but yeah, looking at that 8 spot too, Matas Buzelis, that's maybe
Big
another
name.
potential name that we could look at. I think Ron Holland's probably going to end up being picked more in the later lottery just because of the injury that happened and the way that Ignite's season went, because
Mhm.
Buzelis played the whole time. I think that could be, if we're not going to go with Connect at 8, although, like you said, if I had to pick, that would be my favorite pick at 8. And then you address the point guard need and you get your starting small forward that can immediately come in and play. And maybe, just because it's the Spurs, they want a guy like Dalton to earn his reps. Maybe he would start coming off the bench, but I don't know, man. I think about that and then I forget about Keldon. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And obviously that could get into a whole nother discussion on potential trade scenarios. But before we get into that, really, if we're just assessing Dalton Connect at 8, Champagny, I love Champagny.
Mhm.
But Champagny can also, I mean, he's getting paid $2 million. He can easily be the third string 3.
Absolutely. Absolutely, or be a plug and play guy.
Yeah.
Whenever we inevitably rest somebody or someone's not having a great shooting night, Julian Champagny is perfect in that situation. Another name I think we could keep an eye out for at that 8 spot. He's been kind of slowly but surely moving up a lot of guys' draft boards, and he's someone that we would have to draft based quite a bit on potential. Is Mr. Williams, Cody Williams, uh,
Yes.
who's rising up on a lot of people's draft boards. Very versatile, athletically gifted. I think we've all seen what his brother Jalen was able to do, but I think Jalen stayed in college for 3 years, whereas
Yes.
Cody's coming out as a one and done, which is kind of the tosser or the thing that you have to think about here because Jalen immediately has impacted Oklahoma City and become their second best player. Is Cody Williams going to do that? Probably not. So he's more of a
Right.
project piece, but if he can even reach, a sliver of what his brother has reached, he's somebody that we could potentially pick up at that 8th spot.
And that's a potential pick, and that's another thing that ties into the 4 and 8 thing. That gives you, the flexibility to draft Cody Williams at 8. I would say that Cody Williams and Dalton Connect are kind of like
Two
opposite.
sides of a coin, right?
Yes, yes. Like you've got Connect who's going to come in and is just immediately like, a 23-year-old fully developed. Where I was listening to, I think it was called Through the Ringer. I sent you this clip earlier. You might have listened to it. But Kevin O'Connor was talking about Cody Williams, and there was somebody else that he was doing the show with, and I know his face, and I don't know his name. I feel bad, but it's Through the Ringer. If you go to Ringer NBA's channel, they put out like a 12-minute clip. Kind of, I think it was called Mock Draft Power Rankings. But
Mm.
the point is, the other guy he was with, like I've seen on ESPN, he's some big draft guy. Anyways, they were saying that Cody Williams is a type of guy who might be 2 years away from being 2 years away.
Mm. I heard
He
that, yeah.
yeah, and he does have like there's a lot of upside with him, just like his brother, and he's 6'8". He could play the 3, but there were even some questions too like apparently this year, like they might have even like told him not to shoot. Like shooting is like probably like at Sohan levels coming in.
He
You
had a
know what?
good percentage. I remember this part. He had a
Okay.
really good percentage, but he only took 2 a game. And you're right. There was like a hesitancy there where it felt like he was being told not to shoot, which I think is odd. If he's shooting, I think 40% from
Okay.
3, uh, but on very low volume. So it's something to keep an eye. I haven't watched enough tape to be able to assess like, does his shot look smooth or not? But if they're talking about a hesitancy there, something tells me it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, and so that maybe that is better than Sohan coming in. Now that you're telling me those percentages, admittedly, I hadn't looked at those.
Mhm.
But from what I had heard from them, they were saying that that's kind of a question. Where like with Dalton Connect, like that's his thing. Like he is
Yeah.
a sharpshooter. So I think I would go with that too, Ethan, because of the fact that, I mean, we just heard Wemby say again in his Rookie of the Year press conference. We can talk about some of that to wrap this up here too, Ethan, if you want
Mhm.
to kind of give your takeaways from that. But he said, I want to win as soon as possible. Now we know from all the other Wemby quotes and his personality that he's very patient and trusts in the Spurs process. But this is something that we talked about in our Dalton Connect prospect profile, where you said, he's someone who we can draft that can also kind of simultaneously accelerate the timeline, if you will,
Mhm.
because he's 23 and coming in and is going to come in more NBA ready, to contribute than other guys maybe. And when you
Mhm.
talk about Rob Dillingham and Dalton Connect, I mean the two biggest, we've talked about this, and I think Trey Jones, the end of his season was really solid.
Really
I was
good.
listening to Rob Trejo Jr.'s kind of end of season preview, and he was hitting on a lot of good things that he did, especially rebounding the ball. We
Mhm.
talked about his shooting as well, but that's something else that stood out. But still, we've talked about it many times, Ethan. As much as we love Trey, on a championship team, he's a backup point guard. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? And Rob would fill that need, and then the three. It's the one and the three. It's what we've been talking about all year. Obviously, yes, backup center, that's a whole nother conversation. But really, the biggest needs for the Spurs that you and I have talked about is
Mhm.
point guard and then, another bucket getter on the perimeter. And I know that both of these guys are kind of bucket getters, but still, they would feel like, I mean, when I pictured those two on the team, Ethan, I'm not trying to just, ramble on and on forever
Oh,
about
you're
it.
good.
It really would fit super well because Dalton can, like we've still watched Dalton Connect's highlights. Like he can play off the dribble, but he's also a really good off ball guy.
Mhm.
And then you've got Rob Dillingham, who is more of an on ball guy. But still, even like you've seen Connect, or excuse me, you've seen Rob Dillingham. I talked about this in the prospect breakdown, running off screens off the ball, hustling there. So I think there is still some off ball stuff that we could do with Rob Dillingham as a shooter. And he's somebody who can shoot moving the ball. You know,
Mhm.
better than you expect. So he's not someone who has to have his feet set, to make a shot coming off a screen is what I'm getting at there. But when you think about him in the 2-man game with Wemby, and then you add Connect
Mhm.
and um Connect and Devin, playing off that as shooters, I
Mhm.
really see your vision here, Ethan. I'm kind of just talking about it out loud, but that's my dream scenario too.
Yeah, I know defense has been a massive problem for this team, especially when Wemby's not playing. So I understand concerns about Rob Dillingham defensively. And I think Dalton's a better defender than people are giving him credit for, but even still, that's not going to be his number one highlight coming into this draft. However, I think everyone can agree that we are not nearly as explosive offensively as we need to be. Both of these names provide that. Rob Dillingham, say what you will about his size and defense as a primary ball handler in the pick and roll, and as a lethal shooter, he is going to immediately be a pick and roll partner for Victor Wembanyama. They can draw two along the perimeter. You cannot switch a pick and roll with Rob Dillingham and Victor Wembanyama. It is impossible. Then you pair that with Devin as your in between mid-range scorer as well as an off-ball shooter. You have Jeremy Sohan in the dunker spot and as a cutter, kind of in that Aaron Gordon role, not to mention the defense he provides. I think things are starting to connect, no pun intended, with Dalton Connect. And then if you do want to play Dalton Connect off the bench, let's say it's him, Keldon, and Malachi as the wings, and we just kind of play small off the bench. Let's say that happens. Um, bench scoring was impossible last year. We had one of the worst shooting, statistically, one of the worst shooting benches in the league because Malachi is not a super consistent 3-point shooter. We know Keldon's deficiencies as a 3-point shooter at times. He's kind of hot and cold. So I think both players provide a connectivity and an explosiveness offensively that would eliminate their defensive deficiencies potentially, and plus another full off season with the roster. Chemistry is a big component of defense anyway, and we can address the backup center questions either via trade at the trade deadline with Zach Collins or in free agency, whatever it might be.
Maybe it's Charles.
Maybe it is Charles Bassey. Maybe him being injured last year was the big deficiency there, and that's why it was such a difficult watch when we subbed Zach Collins into
Maybe
battle.
it's not, but you know what
But
I
there is
mean?
that potential.
Yeah.
That was what he was supposed to do last year, but we just didn't see it because of the injury.
Yeah, and I know we're about to wrap up here, Ethan, but I just want to hit on some of the points you made because I think you did a great job kind of summarizing the potential of that lineup. But talking about Dalton Connect, who knows? Maybe we do want to keep Champagny in the starting lineup. Malachi, you got some competition. You know what I mean? You could just play. He could just take Malachi's minutes as the backup too. Also, I forgot about that possibility.
There is that possibility. And we saw that Malachi plays better when you put him under the fire a little bit. We benched him. He came back way stronger. But as he kind of settles in, he might lapse off offensively.
Well, I know we didn't get into any of the trade talk here, Ethan, but I think that's fine because mainly as of right now, with trades, that's just kind of a thing where we could sit here and speculate, but then if it doesn't happen, all the talk's kind of just bleh. Right. And also, we still need some stuff to talk about later this week, potentially, in our episode, which we will finally go over the article on Blake Wesley. But also, we'll discuss all the potential, trade scenarios with Atlanta getting number one and also just the Spurs being in this position with Wemby and having 2 top, 8 picks. That just gives the Spurs a lot more options on the table as if they were to not get this Toronto pick. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this stuff plays out. For all of the 230 of you in here right now, we truly appreciate you guys so much. We appreciate all the stuff on the channel, all the support lately. We just got to 2,000 subscribers. It means the world to me and Ethan, y'all. So we really appreciate you guys, and we're going to keep being here throughout the offseason talking Spurs. Thank y'all so much for hanging out with us today. If you want to support the channel, another way that you can do that is you can go ahead and head over to the SSPN spread shop, sspn.myspreadshop.com. Link is in the description and the channel description. We'll be back later this week talking more Spurs. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch y'all later.